at our heart valves as well as eventually the blood flow. So we have, for instance, two sets of heart valves. Okay. Those that are the atrioventricular valves are called abbreviated as the AV valves. Now they are, for instance, the one over here as well as the one over here. So the one on the right side is what we call the tricuspid valve. And the one on the left side is your bicuspid valve. So they're there so that blood can flow from the top to the bottom chamber, top to the bottom chamber. So it allows it to go from the atrium to the ventricle. Now we're going to take a look at the other set, which are the semilunar valves. So semi meaning half, lunar, moon. So they actually do look like half moon, yeah, in some sense, and so they are over here. For instance, right, one over here and the other one over here. Now, how they're named is really based on, for instance, where the blood is going to lead into. For instance, from the right atrium to the right ventricle, and blood eventually has to go through this area, through the valve, and to the lungs. This is my version of the lungs, not the best looking one, but they're the lungs. So we call these valves the pulmonary valve. Okay. So the pulmonary valve will allow the blood to go from the right atrium through the pulmonary valve, through the pulmonary trunk, into eventually to the lungs. So allow the blood to flow from the heart to the lungs. And why do they have to go to the lungs? Right, if you see the coloration over here, it shows you that these are deoxygenated blood. It's depleted with oxygen. So you have to go to the lungs in order to get the oxygen and get rid of the CO2. Now the other set, right over here, eventually blood will go from the left side chambers, okay, and all the way to the aorta. So we call that set the aortic valve or aortic semilunar valve. So it allows the blood to go from the heart to the aorta and to the rest of the body. So they're quite important. Now let's take a look at this view. You can see the AV valve very close. This is a picture of your tricuspid valve. And so if you take a look at the cusp over here, they're not just floating by themselves, they are actually attached to the bottom muscle, which we call the papillary muscle here, through these strings. So we call these strings chordae tendineae. Another name you might know for it is the heartstring. Okay. But make sure on your lab exam or your lecture exams, make sure you put down chordae tendineae, yeah, not heartstring. Now, so this is very important to hold on to the cusp, as it will control, for instance, how the blood will flow. So how the blood flows through these valves, for instance, when using our bicuspid valve as an example, when your papillary muscles are relaxed, okay, then these chordae tendineae, the heartstrings, are relaxed too. As a result, the valves are open. Then the blood can flow through from the atria to the ventricle. Over here, it will go from the left atria to the left ventricle. Now, when your papillary muscles are contracted, they are tight, the strings are tightened up, and they close the valves. As a result, the blood is going to flow hopefully in one direction instead of regurgitating back. So the heart valves, one of its functions is to make sure they can flow in one direction and instead of backtracking. Now what if your valves, the AV valves or the chordae tendineae, are damaged? luckily, it's not the end of the world. If the valves are damaged, for instance, we have synthetic ones, synthetic valves to replace the damaged valves, or there are those that are treated valves, animal valves, that you can use as well. And so it's not the end of the world. You can be treated. Now over here, if it's a superior view of your atria being removed, and so we can see the valves. So let's orient ourselves. This is the back side. Here's the front. Now this time, your tricuspid valve, this one is on the right. Here's the left. So you can see the shape really of the half moon on this diagram a little bit better. And you can see the tricuspid versus the bicuspid valve as well. And on the diagram over here, you'll see that the opposite. So a lot of time you'll see when the AV valve is open, the semilunar valve closed. Now there will be one time as all four of them are going to be briefly closed during the heart contraction. Now, so how does your blood flow through the heart? So we're going to take a look at several routes that are very important. So the circulation of the blood from our heart, okay, eventually goes to three pathways. So those that we call systemic circuit, that means blood's going to go from the heart and all the way to the rest of the body. Now, how about pulmonary circuit? Where do you think blood is going to go towards? Right? It goes from the heart to the lungs. And the coronary circulation, oops, missing an eye. So coronary circulation is, for instance, going to the heart. Blood vessels supplying, for instance, the heart itself. So let's take a look over here. Actually, on the next slide. So if we follow from here, let's start from step 10, even though it's in the back, but at least this will make some sense. Now, from your body, okay, this is the body, all the vasculature eventually will drain back into your superior vena cava, your inferior vena cava, as well. From the heart, you have used the coronary sinus. All these deoxygenated blood with waste has to go back to the heart. And where it enters is the right atrium. Okay. So from the right atrium, they will go through the tricuspid valve and to the right ventricle. And then it goes through your pulmonary valve, which is the SL valve, and all the way to the lungs. So here is at the lungs where you get new CO2 and you get rid of, get new oxygen and you get rid of CO2. So now you have all your oxygen packed inside your blood. Your red blood cells are happy. Yeah. So oxygen came in. Yeah. Hemoglobins are carrying them. Then they go back to the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, through the left ventricle, and through the aortic valve, to the aorta, and to the rest of the body. So this is a very, very important pathway as it involves, for instance, the systemic as well as the pulmonary circuit. So what we're not really seeing here is the coronary circulation. So you also have to support the heart itself. Yeah, it's a muscle and it needs lots and lots of nutrients as well as oxygen. So let's take a look at how the blood vessels go. So remember, the blood vessel coming out of here is the aorta. We call this part the ascending aorta. Okay. And you'll see that it makes a turn. This is the aortic arc, and it descends down all the way. Okay. Now from your ascending aorta, we have two major coronary arteries that branches out. One over here, one on this side. Okay. Now which one would be your right coronary artery? Alright, if you orient yourself, this is to the left. Here's the right side. So this one is your, for instance, right coronary artery. Now the right coronary artery will go through and then it branches off into the marginal branch. Okay. And it goes towards the back, and you can see kind of it's kind of more transparent. So it goes to the back and between the two ventricles. So we call the one in the back the posterior interventricular branch. Alright, now let's take a look at the left coronary, because the other one that branches off is your left coronary artery. And now it also branches into two, for instance. The circumflex branch is going to go towards the back. The one in the front is going to go also in between the two ventricles, so we call it the anterior interventricular branch. Okay, so hopefully you will understand how it branches off, and as well as the naming of some of these blood vessels. Now you might have heard of myocardial infarction. Now this is another name for a very common what we call the heart attack. So myocardial infarction, so imagine if you have a clot and it's big enough, it got stuck right over here in the blood vessel and it can't travel anymore. So what do you think happened to the blood supply downstream? Right, the blood supply is going to drop in those areas. Now if the blood supply drop, what about their oxygen level? Right, if there is a big chunk of plaque over here, you're going to have less red blood cell traveling, so less oxygen. Now if there's less oxygen in this area, can your cell make ATP without oxygen? No, yeah, so ATP level is going to drop from the mitochondria. Now if mitochondria can't make your ATP, can muscle contraction go on as usual? No, yeah. So your muscle contraction, as we say, need ATP as one of those fuels and energy source, yeah, to move the actins and myosin. So you will have a hard time, for instance, because the heart, at least parts of the tissue, are going to slowly um, die off. So it's very important if you notice anything different, um, go to the doctors right away, if not the ER. Now, at the emergency room or at the doctors, they will try their best to dissolve the clot so that you will be able to have blood flow through the region as soon as they could. Now, so very important and to watch out for. Now, as we supply regions of our heart with oxygen nutrients, they also produce waste, so you actually have to move everything back, the waste as well as deoxygenated blood back to the heart through the coronary veins. So for instance, this one over here is a main one. We call it the great cardiac vein. And there's some on the side as well. You have the small, the anterior, as well as the middle cardiac veins. Now they all drain back into this transparent sinus in the back. We call it the coronary sinus. So everything does drain back into the coronary sinus, and eventually, where do blood from the coronary sinus have to drain back into? Right, they have to drain back into the right atrium. Yeah, so then at least they can go to the lungs again to get regenerated. So here's another view of it. Anterior view, you can see some of the blood vessels, and this is for your studies. Okay. Now this will be, I think, our maybe last slide in this video. So let's take a look at these tissue and some of their special features. So do you remember the sarcoplasmic reticulum? Right, this is very similar to your rough endoplasmic reticulum, a set of tubule system in the muscle cells. Now same in your cardiac muscle cell. This is a place where they're going to store something very important. I'll give you a hint. It's charged. Another hint, you see a lot of them in milk, right? Calcium. Okay, so this is a place that they store calcium, and actually they found that there are a little bit less sarcoplasmic reticulum in cardiac muscle cells than skeletal muscle cells. Now, how about production of ATP? Now, where does it occur at? Right, your power plant of the cell, which is mitochondria. Now, your cardiac muscle cell have tons and tons and tons of these mitochondria. So they need to use lots of oxygen. Okay, they use lots of oxygen to go through aerobic respiration. And with that, they can be using glucose or, for instance, derivatives of amino acids, fatty acid. You can make lots and lots of ATP for muscle contraction. Now, regeneration of heart cells. This is right now, or before, we have hardly we don't really readily see regenerations of heart cell. It's because sometimes the stem cell are not very activated, and they also don't undergo mitosis. But there have been studies where they observe, or you have a male patient and you receive a heart from a female donor. And after a few years, when they take a look at the donor's heart in the recipient, they found that there are some XY cells with XY chromosomes that are present. So they give them some researchers, and the study shows that there is possibility of some of the cells from the donors that actually may migrate to different places and start again, perhaps as cardiac cells. So more research is needed, but perhaps in the future, one day, we may be able to say, yes, we could regenerate heart cells. Now, the heart also have something very special. They have something called the intercalated disc. If you take a look over here, the discs are the zigzag area. Oops, the zigzag area. And if we were to pull apart the two cells, that's where we call the intercalated disc. Now, where these discs are, you will see, for instance, gap junctions. This is one type of the cell junctions, and gap really means there are pukas, there are holes, for instance, yeah? So as a result, for instance, if you have lots of sodium on this side, do you think they will be able to transfer and go to the other side of this other cell? Yes, they can. So they have a way for the cells to communicate. Yeah. So this is great for communication, especially when the heart cell has to undergo action potential. So great for action potential. Okay, because we want our heart muscle cells to all contract in unison, yeah, so that they all work together. All right, we'll leave the next one on to the other rest of the video lectures. Okay.